Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you bought a home. You budgeted meticulously, right?
Hmm.
Mortgage, insurance, maintenance, maybe even a rainy day fund.
The usual suspects.
Exactly. And then the property tax bill hits. And it's not just high. Year after year, it just keeps climbing.
Yeah, we're talking about increases that can feel, well, genuinely staggering. They can fundamentally change the whole cost equation of owning a home.
Totally. Our source material dives into data from a major metro area, Cook County, Illinois. It showed that total property taxes billed, they went up by an average of 99% over just 20 years.
Wow.
That's 2000 to 2019, essentially doubling in 2 decades.
Doubling.
And if you zoom in on specific residential areas within Chicago, some wards saw residential property tax increases that are, well, almost unbelievable, like as high as 863%. 863%. That is, it's a truly dramatic set of figures when you lay them out like that.
Right. And for anyone who owns a home or is maybe thinking about buying one, these numbers raise a really fundamental, often urgent question. Why is this particular cost rising so much faster than, other household expenses, even income?
What's going on? What are the mechanics here? Because for most people, I think, the whole process of how property taxes are set and increased can feel really opaque, like a black box.
It absolutely can seem that way.
So our mission today is to kind of pull back that curtain using the source material you shared. We're doing a deep dive into understanding U.S. property taxes.
Right.
Not just the definition, but how they're calculated, what tools might exist to maybe ease the burden a bit, and critically, how they've actually behaved in a real-world, large-scale example.
That Cook County data.
Exactly. Start with the basics, look at a really crucial tool, the homestead exemption, and then we'll spend a good chunk of time dissecting that 20-year property tax history from Cook County, Illinois. We're drawing heavily on the PAPA study analysis from the county treasurer's office.
Yeah, the source material gives us both that foundational knowledge, the nuts and bolts of taxes and exemptions, and this very rich, specific data set from Cook County.
So the goal is?
The goal is really to synthesize all this, cut through the numbers, and give you a clearer, more actionable picture of these really significant, often rapidly changing homeownership costs, and maybe understand some of the factors driving those increases.
All right, let's lay the groundwork then. At the most basic level, what are property taxes, according to our sources? What's the core idea?
Okay, so according to the source material we're using, property taxes are typically applied to real estate, homes, land, commercial buildings, based on their assessed value.
Assessed value, not market value.
Right. That's a key distinction. It isn't necessarily what you could sell it for today. It's a value determined by the local government's tax assessor's office, specifically for taxation purposes.
Okay.
It's the baseline figure the taxing authorities use to figure out your share of the local tax load.
So the assessor assigns a value, and that's the number taxes hinge on. How does the actual tax bill get generated from that assessed value? Is it like a fixed percentage?
Well, the sources explain it can vary depending on the specific place, the jurisdiction. It might be a percentage of that assessed value, which then often gets adjusted by something called an equalized assessed value and the local tax rate.
Equalized assessed value.
Or in some systems, it might be a fixed amount per unit of value, often called mills or a millage rate. But regardless of the exact local formula, whether it's a rate on an adjusted value or a millage rate, that assessed value is always the essential starting point. It's the foundation.
Got it. Assessed value is key. Now let's talk about something homeowners often hope gives them a bit of a break, the homestead exemption. What's this supposed to do? What does it actually achieve for a homeowner?
The homestead exemption, as the source material describes it, is a legal provision. It generally serves sort of a dual purpose, though one aspect is much more top of mind for the average homeowner paying their tax bill.
Okay, 2 purposes.
Yeah. One is legal protection. So under specific, often difficult circumstances like a spouse passing away, certain debt collection issues, or bankruptcy, it can shield a portion of the home's value or equity from some types of creditors.
Okay, some protection there. What's the other part?
The second part, and for most people the most direct and significant function, is its role in minimizing property taxes.
Ah, the tax-saving part. That's what most people probably think of.
Exactly.
So it has debt protection and tax saving. Let's focus on the tax side first. How exactly does it lower the property tax bill? Does it change the tax rate?
No, typically not the rate itself. The source material is pretty clear here. Instead, the exemption reduces your property tax obligation by lowering the taxable value of your home.
Okay, so not the rate, but the value the rate gets applied to.
Precisely. Think of it less like a discount on the rate and more like a discount on the amount being taxed. It basically shrinks the portion of your home's assessed value that's subject to tax.
Ah, I see. So if my home is assessed at, say, $200,000, the exemption might knock, what, $50,000 off that value before they calculate the tax?
Exactly right. That's the most common way it works, as described in the sources. It's often a fixed reduction in the assessed value. The source gives a really helpful example.
Yeah.
Imagine a local homestead exemption lets you exempt the first $50,000 of your home's assessed value. If your home is assessed at $150,000, you don't pay taxes on the full $150K.
Right.
You'd only pay on the remaining $100,000. That's the $150,000 minus the $50,000 exemption.
Okay.
Now, think about a home assessed lower, maybe $75,000. With that same $50,000 exemption, that homeowner only pays taxes on $25,000.
That example really highlights something interesting, doesn't it? A flat dollar exemption like that seems to give a much bigger relative boost to owners of less expensive homes. In your example, the $50K exemption cut the taxable value of the $150K home by a third, but it cut the taxable value of the $75K home by 2/3.
That's exactly the point the source material emphasizes. A fixed homestead exemption inherently creates a more progressive tax effect.
Progressive, meaning it helps lower value homes proportionally more.
Yes. Because the same dollar amount is subtracted regardless of the total value, owners of homes with lower assessed values see a larger percentage reduction in their taxable base. This structure, whether intended or not, tends to make the property tax burden relatively lighter for those with more modestly valued homes.
That's interesting.
And the source adds a note that in some places, the revenue lost from these exemptions might be made up through other taxes, like local or state sales tax.
Oh, shifting the burden potentially. So who qualifies for this? Is it automatic for every homeowner?
The main requirement, the absolute baseline, according to the source material, is that the property has to be your permanent primary residence.
In your main home.
Right. That's the core idea everywhere that offers it. You generally can't claim it on a vacation home, an investment property, or a rental if you live somewhere else. It's for the place you actually live.
Makes sense. Okay, primary residence. Are there other groups who might get this maybe on top of that?
Yes, the sources detail that many states and localities offer additional or maybe enhanced homestead exemptions based on specific criteria.
Like what?
Things like individuals with a disability, older adults often defined as 65 or older veterans, especially those with service-connected disabilities or perhaps disabled law enforcement officers or first responders.
So specific groups might get extra relief.
Typically, yes. These are usually layered on top of or offered alongside the basic primary residence requirement.
It sounds like eligibility can get pretty specific depending on where you live and your situation. How do you actually get the exemption applied? Does it just happen, or do you need to do something?
This is a really critical, practical point for homeowners because the process varies a lot. The source material notes that most U.S. states do have some kind of homestead exemption, but the rules, eligibility, how it's applied, how much it's worth, the protection offered, they differ significantly state by state.
So no one-size-fits-all answer.
Definitely not. And while in some states it might be applied automatically once the assessor figures out it's your primary residence, maybe from mailing address records or something.
Oh, yeah.
In many other states, homeowners absolutely must actively file a claim to receive it.
You have to file paperwork. Is that a one-time thing?
Well, in many places where you have to file, you might need to file a claim potentially every single year.
Every year? Wow.
Yeah, usually with your county or local tax assessor's office. And there can be strict deadlines for filing each year to make sure it applies to that year's tax bill.
So the takeaway is, don't assume anything. Check your local rules.
Absolutely. You need to be proactive. The source also points out a couple of exceptions, like New Jersey and Pennsylvania, which don't have state-level homestead exemptions for property tax purposes, though homeowners there could still potentially use federal bankruptcy exemption limits if they end up filing for bankruptcy.
That's really good to know. Check local rules, meet deadlines. Now, you mentioned the other side of the exemption protection from creditors and in bankruptcy. Does that mean if I have the exemption, my mortgage bank can't foreclose if I, stop making payments?
This is probably the most critical thing to understand about the limits of the homestead exemption, and the source is crystal clear on this. No, a homestead exemption does not prevent or stop a bank, mortgage lender, or anyone holding a secured debt from foreclosing if you default.
Because the mortgage is secured by the house itself.
Exactly. The property is the collateral for that loan. The lender has a lien. The exemption doesn't override that fundamental agreement.
Ah, okay. So the protection is only against unsecured creditors, like credit card debt, medical bills, personal loans not tied to the house.
Precisely. That's where the protection generally applies. The source clarifies that the protection limit, which, again, varies wildly by state, maybe $5,000, maybe over $500,000,
Huge range.
applies specifically to the homeowner's equity in the property, not the home's total value.
Equity meaning the value minus what you owe on the mortgage.
Right. The difference between market value and what you owe on secured debts. If your equity is higher than your state's homestead exemption limit, unsecured creditors might be able to force a sale of the home to get paid after the mortgage and other secured debts are satisfied, of course.
Okay, that distinction is crucial. It protects your ownership stake up to a limit from debts other than the ones secured by the house itself.
Right.
What about bankruptcy? You mentioned that too.
Yes, both federal and state laws provide homestead exemptions for bankruptcy. Federal law sets a baseline. The source notes it was $25,150 per debtor after April 1st, 2019, so double that for a couple filing jointly, and it gets adjusted for inflation.
Okay, a federal minimum.
But many states have their own homestead exemption limits for bankruptcy, and they're often much higher than the federal one. People filing usually pick the state limit if it's better for them.
But,
and this is so important it bears repeating, even in bankruptcy, claiming the homestead exemption does not stop your mortgage lender from foreclosing if you don't make the payments.
okay, let me try to sum up the homestead exemption then. Primarily, it lowers your taxable property value, helps lower value homes more proportionally.
Right.
You often have to file for it, maybe every year, so check locally.
Sure.
It protects your equity from unsecured creditors and in bankruptcy up to a certain state-specific limit.
Mm-hmm.
But it offers zero protection against foreclosure by your mortgage lender if you default.
That perfectly captures the essentials, the mechanics, and the limitations from our source material. It's valuable for lowering the annual tax bill and protecting equity from some debts, but it doesn't change the mortgage obligation.
Got it.
The source does add a little historical note, mentioning the 1862 Homestead Act. That was about granting public land for settlement, westward expansion. Totally separate thing from the modern tax exemption, just shares the name.
Right. Interesting history, but different concept.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got the fundamentals of property taxes and the homestead exemption down. Now, let's pivot to that real-world case. The Cook County, Illinois data from the Pappas study.
Right. This study from the Cook County Treasurer's Office looked at 20 years of property tax history, 2000 to 2019. And its executive summary doesn't mince words. It says property owners in Cook County are overburdened by these taxes.
Overburdened, okay.
And the data is meant to show how they reached that conclusion.
Let's hit those headline numbers that grabbed us at the start. What was the overall trend for total property taxes billed all property types in Cook County over those 20 years?
This study shows a really dramatic increase countywide. Between 2000 and 2019, total taxes billed across all property types almost doubled.
Almost doubled.
The increase was 99%. It went from $7.85 billion in 2000 up to $15.58 billion in 2019.
Wow.
That's an absolute increase of $7.73 billion more being billed annually by the end of that period.
$7.73 billion more per year just across the county. That's huge. Did this hit the city of Chicago and the suburbs evenly?
No, the study breaks it down, and there were definitely differences. In the city of Chicago itself, total taxes billed jumped by a higher percentage than the county average. It went up 115% over the 2 decades.
115% in the city.
Yeah, from $3.25 billion in 2000 to $6.99 billion in 2019. That's a $3.74 billion increase just within the city limits.
And the suburbs, how did they fare?
Suburban Cook County also saw a very large increase, though the percentage rate was a bit lower than the cities. Total taxes in the suburbs rose by 87% over the same time.
87%. Still massive.
Oh, absolutely. It went from $4.59 billion in 2000 to $8.59 billion in 2019. That's an absolute increase of $4 billion in the suburbs.
So wait, the suburbs had a slightly larger increase in raw dollars, $4 billion, versus $3.74 billion in the city.
That's right.
But the city had the higher percentage jump, 115% versus 87%.
Exactly. It means while the burden grew everywhere, it grew relatively faster from its starting point within Chicago proper based on total dollars billed.
Okay, those numbers paint a stark picture. But the study used that word overburdened. To really get what that means, we need context.
Yeah.
How did these huge tax hikes compare to, say, wage growth or the general cost of living?
This is where the study provides that really crucial comparative data. This gives the overburden finding its teeth. It contrasts the tax increases with wage and consumer price trends.
Okay.
According to the study, average wages for employees in Cook County public and private sector went up by just 57% between 2000 and 2018.
57% wage growth. But property taxes countywide were up 99% and 115% in the city. Wow. There's a big gap already.
It is, and the gap gets even wider when you look at the cost of living, using the Consumer Price Index for the Chicago area as a measure of inflation.
Yeah.
The study found the cost of living rose by only 36% between 2000 and 2019.
Okay, let me just repeat those numbers because the contrast is,
Wow.
Average property taxes billed countywide, up 99%. General cost living, inflation,
Yeah.
up only 36%.
Right.
Average wages, up 57%.
Yeah.
So this isn't just taxes going up. They went up way, way faster than both the cost of everything else and how much people were earning on average.
That is precisely why the study concludes owners are overburdened. Their ability to pay, reflected in wages and general costs, just didn't keep pace with the property tax demands.
That makes the overburden claim really concrete.
It does. It wasn't just taxes keeping up with the economy. They were accelerating far beyond those benchmarks, putting more and more pressure on household budgets, especially for homeowners.
So which types of properties felt this pressure the most? Did homes, residential properties, see bigger percentage increases than businesses, commercial properties?
The study breaks this down too, and the data clearly indicates that yes, residential properties shouldered a higher percentage increase in their tax burden compared to commercial properties. And this was true in both the city and the suburbs.
Okay, let's focus on residential first, since that's homeowners. How bad was it?
In the city of Chicago, residential property taxes didn't just double. They shot up by an absolutely staggering 164% over the 20 years.
164%.
Yes, from $1.33 billion in 2000 to $3.51 billion in 2019.
That's way higher than the overall 115% increase for all property types in the city.
Correct. The increase was disproportionately felt by residential properties. In suburban Cook County, residential taxes also jumped significantly, up 116% during the same period.
116% in the suburbs for homes.
Rising from $2.45 billion to $5.29 billion.
And how did commercial property taxes compare? Did they go up less?
They also saw substantial increases, yes, but generally at lower percentage rates than residential in both areas. Chicago commercial taxes went up 81%, from $1.92 billion to $3.48 billion. And suburban commercial taxes increased by 53%.
50%.
From $2.15 billion to $3.30 billion.
So let me just make sure I have this right. The key finding here is residential property taxes went up more percentage-wise than commercial property taxes did. And that happened in both the city of Chicago and the suburbs.
That's exactly what the data strongly suggests.
Which implies that the burden of funding local government through property taxes kind of shifted, relatively speaking, more onto homeowners compared to businesses over those 2 decades.
That appears to be the clear trend shown in the data, yes. The percentage growth was faster for residential.
Okay, to make these percentages less abstract, the study has data for specific Chicago wards and suburban towns, right? That's where you see the really wild variations.
Exactly. The ward and municipal data shows the real ground-level impact. The study gives examples of residential tax increases in Chicago wards that are, well, just astonishing. We mentioned that 863% in Ward 3 earlier.
863%. I mean, just think about that. If your residential tax bill was, say, $2,000 in 2000,
yeah,
by 2019, it's nearly $20,000, almost 10 times higher just from the overall tax levy increase.
It's an incredible figure. And it wasn't alone. Other wards saw massive residential jumps too. Ward 42 up 485%, Ward 25 up 478%, Ward 27 436%, Ward 1 357%.
Wow.
These aren't just outliers. These are significant parts of the city where residential taxes multiply 3, 4, 5, even close to 9 times over 20 years.
And those wards you mentioned, Ward 1, 25, 27, 42, those are areas that saw a lot of development, gentrification, rising property values during that time, right? Does the study link those things?
Well, the study primarily focuses on the build amounts and the government levies driving them, but you can't really separate that from the assessment process. Rising property values, which reflect things like gentrification or just increased demand.
Yeah.
I mean, the base value for calculating taxes goes up. And if the taxing bodies, schools, parks, city, are also asking for more money through higher levies, you get this compounding effect.
So rising values plus rising levies equals exploding tax bills in some areas.
That's the dynamic. And the data really shows how uneven it was. While some wards saw those huge spikes, others had much lower percentage increases in residential taxes, still big maybe, like Ward 41 at 87% or Ward 18 at 50%, but nowhere near the extremes. It shows how local economics really interact with the tax system.
It's a very localized impact. What about the suburbs? Did any towns see increases like the city's extremes?
The suburban data also shows big variations and significant increases, though maybe not quite reaching those 800% plus levels. Some examples of large suburban residential increases were South Barrington at 186%.
Okay, nearly triple.
Willow Springs at 175%, Oak Park 162%, Western Springs 155%, Riverside 127%.
So, yeah, maybe not 9 times higher, but doubling or nearly tripling your home's tax bill in 20 years?
Yeah.
That's still a massive financial hit for homeowners there, especially compared to wage growth.
Absolutely. 100% or 150% increase when wages only went up 57% and inflation 36%. That's a major change in the cost of living in that town. And just like the city, some suburbs had lower increases, like Hoffman Estates at 63%. It wasn't uniform out there either.
Right.
The study provides this granular detail to show the unevenness. It also notes commercial properties in these areas went up too, often less percentage-wise, but still significantly, like Ward 27 commercial up 288%.
Okay, we've seen the huge increases, the gap with wages and living costs, the bigger hit on residential properties, and the massive location differences. So the big question is, why? Why did taxes go up so much? What allowed these increases?
The study looks into this by examining the demands from the many local taxing districts in Cook County and how they fund themselves mainly through property tax levies and sometimes referenda.
Tax levies. That's basically how much money each government body asks for from property taxes.
Essentially, yes. The tax levy extension is the total dollar amount each individual government body, your town, your school district, park district, library, etc., requests from the property tax base.
So my tax bill isn't just one number. It's the sum of requests from maybe half a dozen different local entities.
Or more. Cook County is served by 558 separate taxing districts, each with the power to levy property taxes for its specific purpose.
558. Wow.
And the study found that between 2006 and 2019 alone, 39 of those 558 districts more than doubled their tax levy extension, the amount they asked for and got from property taxes.
39 districts doubled their request in just 13 years. You can see how that adds up across the whole county.
It shows a direct link between the funding needs, or maybe desired funding levels, of hundreds of independent bodies and the final bill you get. The cumulative effect drives the trend. The study also points to the role of referenda, especially in suburban districts that are non-home rule under Illinois law.
Non-home rule. What does that mean in practice?
Non-home rule districts in Illinois are generally subject to something called the Property Tax Expansion Limitation Law, or P2TEL, usually just called the tax cap.
Tax cap. Okay.
It limits how much they can increase their total levy each year, usually tied to inflation or 5%, whichever is less. If a non-home rule district wants to raise operating taxes by more than that cap allows, they generally have to go ask the voters for permission.
Through a referendum question on the ballot.
Exactly. The study looked at these tax cap referenda in the suburbs between 2000 and 2019. It found districts asked voters 165 times to approve increases beyond the cap for operating costs.
And did voters approve them?
Only 63 passed. That's just 38%. So, more than 60% of the time, voters rejected letting their local governments exceed the operating tax cap.
Interesting. So voters pushed back on exceeding the cap, but taxes still went up dramatically overall.
They did. Partly because the cap does allow for annual increases up to inflation, which adds up over time, and partly because bond referenda are treated differently.
Bond referenda.
Yeah, these are requests, usually from schools or towns, to borrow money by issuing bonds for big projects, new schools, road repairs, things like that. Paying back those bonds requires extra property taxes, but those levies are outside the regular operating tax cap, though they also need voter approval.
Ah, so separate votes for big projects. How did those fare?
The study found 262 bond referenda in suburban Cook County during this time, and 67% of those passed. A much higher success rate than the operating tax cap referendum.
Okay, so voters seemed more willing to approve tax increases for specific projects like schools than for general budget increases beyond the cap. You also mentioned home rule as a factor.
Right. Cook County has 82 home rule taxing districts. The county itself, Chicago, bigger towns mostly. Home rule units have much broader powers. crucially including the power to raise property taxes without needing voter approval in a referendum.
They don't need to ask.
Generally not for property tax increases, no. And suburban districts that are currently non-home rule can ask their voters to become home rule units, essentially asking voters to give up that referendum control.
How often did that happen? And did voters agree?
The study found suburban districts asked voters 63 times since 2000 to switch to home rule. Only 16 passed, just 26%. So nearly 3/4 of the time, suburban voters said no. They wanted to keep that direct say on tax increases via referendum.
That really paints a picture of the tension, doesn't it? Local governments needing or wanting more money, trying different ways to get it, levies, referenda, home rule requests, and voters sometimes saying yes, sometimes no. But despite the pushback on some things, like exceeding operating caps or granting home rule, the overall result across all 558 districts, plus successful bonds, plus the built-in increases allowed by the cap and the power of existing home rule units, it all added up to those huge overall increases.
That's the picture the study presents. The mechanisms are varied, but the outcome was a system that generated significantly higher tax burdens over 2 decades. The study also included an interesting detail about low voter turnout in some referendum examples, like 26%, 23%, even 18.5%.
Wow, less than a quarter or even a fifth of voters deciding on tax increases.
Yeah, it's a point of interest because while these decisions directly hit homeowners' wallets, the actual choices via referendum are sometimes made by a pretty small fraction of the community.
That low turnout is really thought-provoking. It suggests that even when voters have a direct say, the outcome might be shaped by a motivated minority, which raises questions about representation.
It certainly highlights that link between local civic engagement and, well, your bank account. The drivers for tax increases are their funding needs, service expansions, and while voters have some input, especially in non-home rule areas, the dominant trend the study captured was sharply upwards for the total tax burden.
Okay, so pulling this all together, we've looked at property taxes being based on assessed value, not market value.
Right.
We learned about the homestead exemption that lowers your taxable value, helps lower value homes more, offers limited protection from unsecured debt, but crucially, not from mortgage foreclosure. And you often have to apply for it.
Key points, yes.
And then, using Cook County as a stark real-world case, we saw total property taxes nearly double in 20 years, up 99%, blowing past wage growth, 57%, and inflation, 36%. The study called owners overburdened.
And within that, residential properties saw bigger percentage hikes than commercial, both in the city, 164% raise, and suburbs, 116% raise. The impact varied wildly by location, with some Chicago wards seeing residential taxes skyrocket over 800%.
And these increases came from the cumulative levies of hundreds of local taxing districts, sometimes checked by referenda, sometimes not, depending on the type of request and whether the district had home rule powers.
That's the complex machinery behind the numbers.
So the essential lesson from this deep dive, for anyone owning a home or thinking about it, especially in places with similar dynamics, you really have to understand your local property tax system. It's not just paperwork. It's critical to your financial health.
Absolutely.
Because property taxes aren't always a stable cost. They can be a major, fast-changing, sometimes unpredictable expense. Things like exemptions, how many local bodies tax you, their funding decisions, it all hits your bottom line directly.
Yeah, ignoring or just underestimating how much property taxes can go up could lead to real financial strain down the road, as that Cook County data clearly shows. They can climb much faster than you might budget for based on inflation or even your own raises.
And given these trends, taxes outpacing wages and living costs, maybe shifting more onto homes, varying so much block by block, almost it leaves you with a really big, challenging question to think about, doesn't it? How does this escalating, uneven property tax burden affect where people can actually afford to live? Or even, the long-term financial sense and desirability of owning a home in certain communities versus others?
That's a question that definitely goes beyond just individual budgets. It touches on bigger issues, economic mobility, how cities develop, community planning, equity.
Absolutely. A lot to chew on there. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive into U.S. property taxes and the Cook County experience.
Until next time.